The Emperor of the Dragons returns, but interesting enough, it's not a dragon, but more in line of a true ancient dinosaur. Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review for V-BT10 Phantom Dragon Aeon. Last time we tackled the main bad boy of the set, which is of course Shadow Paladin, but today we dive into the more prehistoric things of Vanguard as we are gonna take a look at the new support for Tachikaze. And this set brings back a beloved unit, which is of course Gaia himself. But this set also, to many surprise, brings back a old archetype in a new jacket. And that's of course the Ancient Dragons. But this time around they take the names of true Ancient Dragons. Before we go on a tangent here, let's dive straight into the new cards and see what these cards can do, what Gaia has in store for us, and what this true Ancient Dragon archetype actually entices. So of course we're going to start with the reprint triggers, and this time they got a reprint trigger for critical as well as a front trigger, but both of them are going to be a 1-star as they're just generic reprints. Then on the same vein we also got a new heal trigger, which is younger Parasound, and it's going to be once again a 1-star as we already have a heal trigger in Tachikaze. Then they also got a new draw trigger, which is Savage Selector, and this is going to be a 3-star as we don't have a full playset of draw triggers, so this is a nice addition. Then on top of that they also got a new critical sentinel trigger in the likes of Gunfire Dragon, Parasaulauncher, and Parasaulauncher is going to be a 5-star as it's one of those new type of critical sentinel triggers, and all of them warrant the 5-star rating. Now they also got a new starter in the likes of Minimumcarno, and this is going to be once again a 1-star as it doesn't bring anything new to the table. Now another new card that they got is a brand new vanilla grade 1, which is the 15k shield variant in the likes of Martial Law Dragon Compscouter. And Compscouter is going to be a 1-star as it's just a vanilla and it doesn't really do anything for what the clan wants to do. Now with that basic stuff out of the way, we're going to dive into some generic support for Tachikaze, and the first that we see is this grade 2 electric artillery dragon Diplorail. And Diplorail has the ability auto rearguard circle. When the attack hits a Vanguard, if this unit has a equip gauge, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. So this is going to be a 1-star for me because not only does it need to hit, and hit effects are inherently bad, but it also needs a gauge and therefore is reliant on something else to provide it with a gauge. And just acquiring this on hit effect to retire something isn't good enough to warrant the need of a gauge. So yeah, that's why it's a 1-star for me. Then followed up we have a grade 3, which is a really interesting grade 3 as we have Gunfire Dragon Ballistic Amalga. And its abilities auto rearguard circle. When it attacks a Vanguard, discard all of this unit's equip gauge, and for each equip gauge discarded for this cost, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. So we have a mass field retire skill, which we have full control over how powerful we want to make it. And honestly, I think this is a solid 3-star card because it gives Tachikaze access to a mass retire in any type of deck, which isn't really that hard to set up because generating equip gauges is actually pretty easy to do nowadays. And with a card like Savage Raider, we can put them all on these units very easily. And because it's just an on-attack skill and not an on-attack that needs to hit, it's actually pretty consistent to get the value off, meaning you can just use this as a tech option in your build at a 1 or a 2 of to just have access to such a card, and it can give any type of Tachikaze deck that extra little flair or oomph to maybe push them into a winning position. So I think it's actually a pretty decent support card. Now another very interesting support card that we've got is this grade 1 loading dragon Acerocargo. And Acerocargo has the ability auto. When this unit is retired from rearguard circle by your card's ability, you may return one of this unit's equip gates to your hand. So this is similar to what we've seen in the very first set for Tachikaze in the likes of Blighttops. The only difference is that Blightop just needed to be retired by any means, so your opponent couldn't even retire during their turn or attack into it. But it costs a counterblast and you can then get 2 gauges. But that said, this doesn't cost you any resource. It only needs 1 gauge, so it's easier to set up. And yes, it needs to be retired by your units, but actually that's much easier to fulfill than you might think. The new Gaia can allow you to do that. We've got some older cards, like I believe Deathrex or Gigarex, that can retire your own stuff, so you get more value out of those plays. And it being a grade 1 gives you more room in your grade distributions to actually play such a card. So for that, I think it's a solid 3-star card, so it gives you access to a pretty decent draw engine for Tachikaze. Now, with that grade 1 in mind, we have a grade 3 that actually synergizes with this card, and that is Slicing Dragon Terror Fairy Xeno, or whatever that is. As it scales Auto Vanguard and Rearguard Circle, when it attacks a Vanguard, costs retire another Rearguard, draw a card. If a unit with equip gauge was retired for this cost, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. So its skill is actually a very proactive cycle, because you retire one of your rearguards to then draw a card. So that's a 1-for-1 trade. It's similar to discarding and drawing. But in this case, you can still attack with that card. So this is an aggressive cycle, as you still get an attack value out of that card you're going to cycle. But on top of that, if that card happens to have an equip gauge, you also get to retire something of your opponent's field, so suddenly that cycle becomes in a +1 in-card advantage. But if we synergize that with the grade 1 we just discussed, then we also get more value, because we can activate the grade 1 skill to then draw that equip gauge into our hand. So that's actually a pretty nice interaction, and Tachikaze have multiple of these type of cards that activate once they are retired, and as seen as this grade 3 can activate those skills without needing to pay a Soul Blast or a Counter Blast, which we have seen with other cards like Gigarex or Megarex, makes this actually a pretty decent supporting grade 3 for whatever deck you might play. Now, the last generic support card that we're going to tackle is the brand new grade 3 Searcher for Tachikaze, which is Prism Bird. And it, of course, has the generic grade 3 Searcher skill. I'm not going to repeat that anymore. It's getting long at this point. But its unique skill to get the extra power skill is Continuous Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. If a new card was put into one of your units' equip gauge this turn, this unit gets power plus 5k. So basically, if you acquire an equip gauge, no matter how weird you're acquiring it, you get this 5k power. That's actually pretty easy to fulfill. So it's a pretty decent way to get the 13k power, and it's the generic grade 3 Searcher. So for that, it's obvious it's a 5-star card, because obviously all of these cards are going to get a 5-star rating. Now, with that said, let's dive into the brand new sub-archetype for Tachikaze, which are the true Ancient Dragons. And first of these true Ancient Dragons is this grade 1 True Ancient Dragon Albertail. And all these true Ancient Dragons share a similar trait, and that is that their secondary effect is all the same skill, as that secondary effect is Auto Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. Once per turn, when your drive check reveals a front trigger, you may have this unit get critical +1 until the end of turn. The true Ancient Dragons turns those front triggers into front/critical triggers, as you immediately gives those cards also the extra crit. Granted, it's only once per turn, so they can only get one extra crit, even though you might double check a front trigger. But nonetheless, it's actually pretty good, as that allows you to get full pressure on every single attack. Because the problem is with front triggers inherently means that, yes, the numbers are high, but your opponent can easily take every single attack if they're sitting at low damage and they have enough room to just tank a couple of hits. Thanks to these potential inherent criticals, they suddenly cannot do that, and every attack then suddenly matters. And of course, Albertail has a unique effect, which is Continuous Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. During your turn, if you have a Vanguard with Ancient Dragon in its card name, this unit gets power plus 5k. So it can be a 13k attacker or booster, depending on where it is on the field. Overall, this is going to be a 2-star for me, because it's just a power unit that isn't really that high, and its archetype unique skill is RNG reliant, because if you don't hit the front trigger, it doesn't really do anything. So for that, I cannot give it more than 2 stars. This card in itself isn't really that great. It's the overall total package of true Ancient Dragons which makes the deck actually playable. Now, the second grade 1 true Ancient Dragon that we have is True Ancient Dragon Petra Feet. And of course, it has the drive check front ability, but its unique ability is Auto Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, or the attack it boosted hits a Vanguard, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, call to one card with Ancient Dragon in its card name from among them to the Rearguard Circle as rest, and shuffle your deck. So this is an in potential plus engine. It sadly doesn't give you extra multi-attacks, but it is a plus engine that also filters your deck, which can actually be really good for this deck, because the more filter you do, the higher the chances that you actually hit those fronts, which you definitely want to happen if you play the True Ancient deck archetype. So for that, I think it's a solid 3-star card, as it gives you a plus engine, which is always good in an Excel deck. And yes, it might be behind an on-hit effect, but because it also can be applied when it's boosted, means it will be very good in all types of pressure plays, even in the early game. Now, if we go to the grade 2 department of the Ancient Dragons, the first one that we see is True Ancient Dragon Heftosi Reiko, or whatever that is. Of course, it has the front trigger effect, but its unique effect is continuous rearguard circle. If it's on an additional rearguard circle, so aka your Axle circles, this unit cannot be retired by your opponent's card effect and it gets power plus 5k. It can be chosen. So effectively, if this thing is on the Axle circle, it becomes a Promised Daughter. But with 1k weaker. Yeah, this is not really that great, and therefore I can only give it 2 stars. Yes, it's nice and all that it gets that power and whatever, but it's effectively a Promised Daughter that can only be played the moment that you ride into your Grade 3, and it needs specifically to be placed on that Axle circle. That's not really that great as of a skill condition, and definitely not for the payout that you get. But you're definitely gonna play it, mainly because it's an Ancient Dragon, and it has the potential to have that inherent extra critical. Now, a grade 2 that's actually a lot better is True Ancient Dragon Alona Ross. And of course, it has the front effect, but it also has the ability, although Vanguard Rearguard Circle, when placed from hand, costs counterblast 1. Look at the free cards on the top of your deck, call up to 1 card with Ancient Dragon in its card name from among them to the Rearguard Circle, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So this is another way to filter your deck and get a plus engine for your Ancient Dragons, but in this case it's consistent access as you get it on place, so you can do it a bit more proactive, unlike the grade 1 that calls it on rest during the battle phase. So overall, this is a solid 3-star cards as it allows you to filter your deck, it gives a plus engine, and it works its way towards the win condition of the True Ancient Dragons, which is getting to those front triggers. Now, once we go into the grade 3 department of the True Ancient Dragons, the first card that we see is a supporting grade 3 in the likes of True Ancient Dragon Barrel Tops, and it of course has the front effect, but its unique abilities, although in Vanguard and Rearguard Circle, when placed, if you have a Vanguard with Ancient Dragon in its card name, costs counterblast 1, draw a card, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So where the grade 2 needs to be placed from hand, this has just a generic one place effect. And for that, it's a draw engine, which is good, and then it gets an extra 5k power, which is a nice addition on top of that, so it's a 17k unit. But on an Axle 2, makes it a 22k attacker, which can hit for magic numbers even against a potential defensive trigger, which can make a difference. So overall, this is a solid 3-star card. It's a draw engine, it makes a bit magic numbers, and just helps you to keep going with your whole pressure plays as you keep getting more cards to hand. But this card becomes a bit better once we look at the main Vanguard unit for the True Ancient Dragons, as that is True Ancient Dragon Bladoromeus. And it, of course, has the front effect, but its unique effect is act on Vanguard Circle once per turn, cost retire a rearguard, choose one of your opponent's rearguard, retire it, search your deck for up to 1 card with Ancient Dragon in its card name, call to the Rearguard Circle, shuffle your deck, and that unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it doesn't cost you a Counterblast or a Soul Blast, but for this effect you can do a 1-for-1 trade with your opponent. So I retire a unit, you retire a unit, but I choose which one. But on top of that, I can search out any Ancient Dragon from a deck and call to the field, and it gets an extra 5k power. So actually, I go +1 in card advantage as I trade off a unit for another unit, but you also lose a unit in the process. And it getting another 5k power actually makes a big impact, because with the other cards it allows us to makes potential magic numbers because we have that 13k booster. But more importantly, if we combine that with Barrel Tops, the supporting grade 3, we can actually make that thing into a 22k unit on a normal circle, so not the Axle circle, making that Axle circle available for that specific grade 2 that needs to be there. But on top of that, because the grade 3 has an unplace effect and not unplace from hand, means we can forcefully activate that skill via this skill. So we can search out the grade 3, call to the board, it gets a plus 5k power, then we activate that grade 3 for, I believe, a Counterblast, then it gets another 5k power, and we draw a card. That's actually pretty good, because it allows us to generate a lot of value over the course of multiple turns thanks to this grade 3, and this grade 3 enables that without needing to pay a Counterblast or a Soul Blast. So that's actually pretty decent. Overall, as a boss unit, it is not as powerful, as it doesn't do some kind of flashy plays that we see with other VR units. But that's to be expected. This is a budget deck build, as the main unit is just a triple R. So with that in mind and what the deck can provide, and reliance on front triggers to then acquire critical triggers, but if you do hit those things and you have a full board, it can be very painful for any deck. It is a pretty decent budget deck, and for that, with a very important boss unit as this card, I think it's a solid 4-star card for what it has to provide. It's this particular card that makes all the other Ancient Dragons a lot better. Without this boss unit doing what it does, would probably not make the True Ancient Dragon deck actually a playable option. Now, with the True Ancient Dragon deck discussed, let's take a look at the bulk of support cards for Gaia himself, and we start with Gaia himself, as here we have Emperor Dragon Gaia Emperor, and its abilities are continuous on Vanguard Circle. During a turn, all of your rearguards with equipped gauge get power plus 5k. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, they get power plus 10k instead of plus 5. So Gaia allows you to basically empower your entire board with pretty beefy numbers. And as soon as it gives all your rearguards with gauges the potential extra power, means that if you have an entire column, it can give that entire column quite a sizable upgrade, especially if your opponent's grade 3, because that's 20k power to that single column. So it allows your deck to actually hit for decent numbers. Now, Gaia's secondary effect is Auto on Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, costs counter plus 1 and retire a rearguard. And this unit gets the original power of the unit retired for this cost until the end of battle. If your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, it gets the original critical as well. So this effect is similar to what we've seen with Brufus for Dark Irregulars, but instead of retiring probably one of your opponent's units, you need to retire one of your own units. Now in Tachikaze, this can actually be very beneficial because you have skills that activate the moment they are retired, so you can actually activate extra skills on top of paying the cost for Gaia himself. Now getting the extra power and critical basically means that Gaia becomes a strong, beefy unit that hits for double critical and potentially somewhere in the ballpark of 30k power with a booster behind it. Now Gaia himself isn't really that powerful because it's just a beater that empowers your board. But by being able to retire units and having that passive power active on your board, that's what Gaia allows himself to be a centerpiece to a very interesting engine for Tachikaze. But to better understand what I'm referring to, let's take a look at the supporting cards around Gaia within this set. One of those cards is a brand new grade 1, which is Full Speed Dragon Blue Sprint. And its ability is Auto Vanguard to Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, you may put one card from your top of your deck face down as an equip gauge for one of your rearguards. So this allows you to get equip gauges, but it allows you to put them anywhere you want. That is a really good skill and will always be pretty good in Tachikaze. Now, his secondary effect is Auto. When retired from Rearguard Circle by your card's ability, call up to one of this unit's equip gauge to the Rearguard Circle. You may put one card from the top of your deck face down as an equip gauge for that unit. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So once this unit gets retired via one of your abilities, aka by potentially Gaia himself, you can superior call one of its gauges to the field, and then if you want to, put a gauge immediately underneath that unit. And of course that's a hard once per turn skill, so you cannot chain this grade 1 into another grade 1 into another grade 1. So this card not only allows you to generate multiple gauges, but it also allows you to potentially have an inherent multi-tech engine in your deck, and you could potentially put a gauge underneath that unit. Now, putting that gauge immediately underneath that new unit is actually pretty good, because certain cards require gauges underneath them to either acquire a certain skill or gain more power. But with Gaia now giving passive power to any unit with a gauge, that suddenly allows you to give more power to that superior called unit, so that means you are more likely to pressure your opponent even if they hit a defensive trigger. So that's actually a pretty impactful skill in combination with Gaia's passive power ability. So with that in mind, I think it's a solid 4-star card, because not only does this work in Gaia, it can actually work in any type of Tachikaze deck that has some units that forces you to retire your own units for a certain cost. Think of the grade 3 rare card that we discussed at the beginning of this video that can still synergize with this grade 1. Now, interesting enough, we've got the exact identical card of this grade 1, but then in the likes of a grade 2, because we have Regiment Dragon Regioden, and it has the exact same skills, as its skills are Auto Vanguard to Rearguard Circle. When it attacks, you may put the top card of your deck face down as an equip gauge for one of your rearguards, and it has the skill Auto. When retired from the Rearguard Circle by your card's ability, call up to one card from this unit's equip gauge to the Rearguard Circle. You may put the top card of your deck face down as an equip gauge for that unit. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once per turn. So basically you have the grade 1 and the grade 2 that can do the exact same thing. That is actually pretty important, because both of them have a hard once per turn skill. So if you have both these cards on the field, you can at least extend your attacks with 2 extra attacks. And what could potentially happen is that you have the grade 1 with the grade 2 underneath it, or the grade 2 with the grade 1 underneath it, and by superior calling the other card to the field, you can immediately give them a equip gauge, and you can potentially then superior call that unit afterwards. So you could basically extend your plays into multiple attacks and multiple attack patterns, which is actually pretty interesting. But besides that, it just allows you to up the consistency of acquiring this multi-attack pattern, because if you only have one unit that allows you to do this, getting access to that extra attack is actually quite tricky, because you don't know if you're actually going to draw the unit or you accidentally equip it beforehand into another unit. So having two cards that have this skill is actually pretty decent, and for that, this grade 2 is obviously also a solid 4-star card, because the same reasons and same things apply to this card. Now the final card that rounds up this support engine for Gaia is this grade 2 Zealous Horn Dragon Dilo for Pyro. And Dilo for Pyro has the abilities Auto Vanguard the Rearguard Circle, when placed from hand, cost counterblast 1, draw a card, and call a card from your hand to the Rearguard Circle. You may put the top card of your deck face down as a equip gauge for that unit. So not only does this card allow you to draw a card, but it immediately allows you to give that unit an equip gauge for a single counterblast. Now this is actually pretty good, and you might think to yourself this isn't an inherent plus because you immediately need to call a unit to the field after you draw it, but you could time it in such a way that if you were already planning to build an entire field from your hand, you first place this card, you activate its skill, and then you draw a card, and then call a card to the field, which you would probably already call to the field. And you can immediately give that unit an equip gauge, which allows you to give units that are reliant on equip gauges but inherently don't create them for themselves to then suddenly acquire that gauge. Now the uniqueness of this card lies in its secondary effect, which is Auto Rearguard Circle. When placed from equip gauge, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of the turn. So this skill basically interacts with the grade 1 and the grade 2 that we just talked about, as if this is the unit that you're going to superior call with those two units, then on top of the potential power it gains from Gaia, it also acquires an extra 10k, which allows you to generate extra powerful multi-attacks, which is pretty important, definitely in the case if your opponents are starting to hit defensive triggers. Sadly, however, this isn't that consistent, as you need to rely on RNG that this thing goes underneath those units as an equip gauge. Yes, we have cards like Savage Raiders that can move these markers around, but that still requires that this card is even equipped at some point. The only interesting thing about this card is that it actually is more consistent with Anger Blader, because we can call this thing to the field and then utilize its on-place effect and then put it as an equip gauge underneath either the grade 1 or the grade 2 with Anger Blader's ability. But the problem is, that means that we then are reliant on another card like a grade 1 or a grade 2 or grade 3 that can retire our own rearguards to then activate that multi-attack, as Anger Blader himself doesn't do that. So it's a bit iffy with the support that we've got right now. This card is basically an RNG card with the grade 1 and the grade 2. But who knows, maybe we get more support in the future that allows us to get more control over our units and our equip gauges to actually get consistent value off of what we're trying to do here. But overall, I think it's still a solid 4-star card, as it is an inherent draw engine. It allows you to get extra equip gauges onto the board, and it could potentially be a strong multi-attack attacker if we are a bit lucky in combination with the grade 1 and the grade 2. Now, with everything said, we can go back to Gaia and we can once again see what the potential is of this card. So we now see the potential of the passive power, as it allows you to get more value out of those multi-attacks, as no matter what we call out of those gauges, if we acquire that 5k and potentially 10k power, that means it will hit no matter the circumstances, even if we apply the potential Axel Circle power on top of that. So that is the value behind that passive power for Gaia. Then a second effect allows you to even acquire that multi-attack, as you can forcefully retire those units. So it's basically a combo starter on top of the fact that Gaia then gets an extra bunch of power and potential criticals. But with everything in mind, I think Gaia is, he himself is more of a combo enabler than actually a really solid boss unit. But it honestly is still better than something we saw in the previous set review with Phantom Blaster Overlord, because Phantom Blaster Overlord is reliant on so many things to go right to actually get value out of him. Gaia does get value no matter what deck you play. You can put it in any Tachikaze deck and you will still get value, because you're going to generate the equip gauges and you're probably going to play the grade 1 and the grade 2 that allows you to multi-attack as they synergize with Gaia. So you get actual standard value out of him. The only problem is, it is reliant on your opponent to be grade 3 to actually get your complete value out of everything, and that might be a bit too slow. So with that all in mind, I think I cannot give it more than 4 stars. Some will probably argue it's a 3-star card, but it still allows you to multi-attack on top of the Axle circles you're already going to generate, and those multi-attack attacks will probably hit for decent numbers, which can overcome defensive triggers. So if things go a little bit right, you could definitely out of nowhere start steamrolling any opponent. And with that, we've seen all the new cards for Tachikaze, a very interesting bunch of new support cards for the clan, as not only do we have a brand new archetype in the likes of the true ancient dragons, but Gaia brings a very peculiar thing to the table with this new type of multi-tech strategies with the grade 1 and the grade 2 that allows you to superior call cards from your gauges itself. So I'm very curious if this is something they're gonna build upon in future sets for Tachikaze, or this is just a one-off done-all for Gaia himself. So depending on what's going to happen next year, this could either be really powerful, or we could go into something completely different, and this might not have actually come up at all after the first couple of weeks once this set drops. But with that said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of this new card for Tachikaze. Are you happy with what Gaia provides for the clan, or do you think they should have got a lot more than what they've got in this particular set? And what is your opinion about this new True Ancient Dragon sub-budget archetype, as this is a new trend that we see with Bushiroad, that they're trying to introduce more of these budget types every single set. And honestly, I'm very, very excited for the future potential of that approach, as that means we have more and more playstyles for any type of players with any type of budget. This video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Timeleaf, and I see you guys in the next one.